The courtroom felt different the moment he walked in. Not tense. Tense would have been easier to handle. This was something colder, something that made the air press down on every chest like invisible weight. The man moved slowly, deliberately, as if every step was a statement. His suit was expensive, tailored in a way that screamed money without needing logos. Dark fabric, crisp lines, a tie knotted with the kind of precision that suggested control over everything, including himself. His shoes clicked against the polished floor, each sound sharp enough to cut through the low murmur of the gallery. He did not glance at the cameras. He did not acknowledge the bailiff. He simply walked to the defendant's table and sat down, folding his hands like a man who had never been told no in his life. Judge Judy watched him from the bench, her expression unreadable. She had seen every kind of defendant walk through those doors, angry ones, scared ones, cocky ones. But this man? He was something else. He carried himself like someone who believed the courtroom was just another room he could own if he wanted to. The plaintiff sat across from him, gripping the edge of the table with white knuckles. Her name was Claire Donovan, a small business owner who had spent the last 6 months trying to collect payment for work she had completed. Work that had been approved, work that had been praised, work that had never been paid for. She did not look at him, not directly, but her jaw was tight, her breathing shallow. Fear and determination fought for space in her posture, and it was hard to tell which one was winning. The bailiff cleared his throat. "This is the matter of Donovan versus Romano, payment dispute." The name Romano hung in the air like smoke. A few people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. One woman whispered something to the man beside her. He shook his head slightly, as if warning her not to say it too loud. Judge Judy leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench. "Ms. Donovan, you claim Mr. Romano owes you $15,000 for completed renovation work on a commercial property. Is that correct?" Claire nodded, her voice steady despite the tremor underneath. "Yes, Your Honor. I completed the job 3 months ago. He signed off on everything, but when I submitted the final invoice, he refused to pay." Judy turned her gaze to the man in the expensive suit. "Mr. Romano, did you receive the work Ms. Donovan describes?" He smiled. Not a warm smile, not even a polite one. It was the kind of smile that said he knew something no one else in the room did. "I did, Your Honor, and the work was fine. No complaints." No, the answer should have been simple. But something about the way he said it made the room feel smaller. Judy's eyes narrowed. "Then why didn't you pay?" Romano leaned back in his chair, crossing one leg over the other. He looked relaxed, comfortable, like a man sitting in his own living room. "I didn't feel like it." The courtroom went silent. Even the clerk, who had been typing quietly, stopped mid-keystroke. Claire's eyes widened. "You didn't feel like it?" Her voice cracked on the last word, disbelief and anger tangling together. Romano turned his head slowly toward her, his smile widening just a fraction. "That's what I said." Judge Judy's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Mr. Romano, this is not a restaurant where you can decide whether or not to tip. This is a contract. You received services. You owe payment." Romano tilted his head slightly, studying Judy with the kind of calm that came from never having to worry about consequences. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I don't think you understand how things work in my world." The phrase landed heavy. A few people in the gallery exchanged glances. The bailiff's hand moved slightly closer to his side, a subtle shift that suggested readiness for something no one wanted to name. Judy did not blink. "Enlighten me." Romano's smile faded just enough to let something colder show through. "In my world, people don't get paid just because they did the work. They get paid when I decide they deserve it. And frankly, Your Honor, I don't think she deserves it." Claire's breath hitched, her hands clenched into fists on the table. "I did everything you asked. I stayed late. I fixed things that weren't even in the contract. You told me I did a great job." Romano shrugged, the gesture slow and dismissive. "You did. But that doesn't mean I owe you anything." Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her expression hardening in a way that made the temperature in the room drop. Mr. Romano, let me be very clear. This courtroom operates on facts, not feelings. You signed a contract, you received the services, you owe the money. Your personal opinion on whether she deserves it is irrelevant. Romano's jaw tightened. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Not fear, but irritation. The kind of irritation a man feels when someone refuses to play by the rules he has spent his life building. He stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. Your Honor, I think you're making a mistake. The room went still. Even Judy paused, her eyes locked on him. Romano took a step forward, his voice dropping to a tone that felt more dangerous than any shout. I'm not the kind of man you want to push. People who push me tend to regret it. The words hung in the air like a threat wrapped in silk. Claire's face went pale. The bailiff straightened, his hand now resting openly near his belt. A few people in the gallery leaned back in their seats, as if distance could protect them from whatever was about to happen. Judge Judy did not move. She did not flinch. She simply stared at him, her expression carved from something harder than stone. Mr. Romano, she said quietly, sit down. He did not sit. Instead, he smiled again, that cold, knowing smile. Or what? The courtroom held its breath. Judy's voice remained calm, steady, unshakable. Or I will hold you in contempt, and the bailiff will remove you from this courtroom. And then you will explain to a judge why you thought threatening a sitting judge was a good idea. Romano's smile twitched. Just a fraction, just enough to show that something had shifted. But he did not sit. Instead, he leaned forward, placing both hands on the table in front of him. His voice dropped even lower, quiet enough that the microphones barely caught it. One call, Your Honor. That's all it takes. One call, and problems disappear. People disappear. The gallery gasped. Claire's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. The bailiff moved, stepping closer to Romano, his presence a clear warning. But Judge Judy did not move. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him, her gaze unwavering, as if she were staring straight through the expensive suit and the cold smile and the veiled threats, down to the fragile, frightened man underneath. Mr. Romano, she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. You just made the worst mistake of your life. The courtroom went silent. Not the kind of silence that waits. The kind of silence that understands something irreversible has just happened. Romano's smile faltered. His hands tensed on the table. For the first time since he walked in, he looked uncertain. And Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes locked on his, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. Now sit down, and let me show you what real power looks like. The seconds stretched like pulled wire, thin and ready to snap. Romano stood frozen, his hands still pressed against the table, his jaw working as if searching for words that refused to come. The courtroom watched him the way people watch a storm, waiting to see which way the wind would turn. Judge Judy did not blink. She did not repeat herself. She simply waited, her silence more powerful than any command. Finally, Romano moved. Slowly, stiffly. He pulled his hands back, straightened his jacket, and lowered himself into the chair. But the confidence he had walked in with was gone. In its place sat something smaller, something wary, like a wolf realizing it had wandered into a trap. Judy let the silence settle for another beat. Then she leaned back, folding her hands on the bench. Mr. Romano, do you understand what you just did? He did not answer immediately. His eyes darted to the bailiff, then to the gallery, then back to Judy. I was making a point. No, Judy said, her voice calm but sharp. You were making a threat, and threats in my courtroom have consequences. Romano's jaw tightened. I didn't threaten anyone. Judy raised an eyebrow. You said, and I quote, one call and people disappear. Would you like to explain what you meant by that? The room leaned in, every ear tuned to his answer. Romano's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's just an expression." "An expression," Judy repeated, her tone flat. "Mr. Romano, I've been on this bench for over 2 decades. I've heard every excuse, every lie, every half-truth people think will work. And what you just said was not an expression. It was a threat. Against Ms. Donovan, against this court, against me." Claire's hands trembled in her lap. She looked down, as if trying to make herself smaller, as if wishing she could disappear the way Romano had just threatened to make her disappear. Judy's gaze softened when it landed on Claire. "Ms. Donovan, look at me." Claire lifted her head slowly, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "You came here seeking justice," Judy said, "and you will get it. No one, no matter how much money they have, no matter how many people they think they can intimidate, will stop that. Do you understand?" Claire nodded, her throat working as she swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor." Judy turned back to Romano. "Now, Mr. Romano, let's talk about what happens next. You owe Ms. Donovan $15,000. That much is clear. But what concerns me more is your behavior in this courtroom. Intimidation, threats, disrespect for the law." Romano shifted in his seat, the first real crack in his composure showing. "Your Honor, I'm not finished," Judy interrupted, her voice like a gavel strike. "You walked in here believing you were untouchable, that money or influence or whatever power you think you have would protect you. But here's the truth, Mr. Romano. In this courtroom, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is the law, and the law does not bend for you." Romano's face flushed, a mix of anger and something else, something that looked almost like fear. Judy leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "You said one call could make problems disappear. Let me tell you what one call from me can do. One call, and the authorities will be looking very closely at your business dealings. One call, and every contract you've signed, every person you've intimidated, every payment you've refused, all of it will be under scrutiny. Do you understand me?" Romano's hands clenched into fists on the table. His breathing quickened. For a moment he looked like he might stand again, might push back. But then his shoulders sagged, just slightly, and he nodded. "I understand." "Good," Judy said. She reached for a file on her bench, flipping it open with deliberate calm. "Because I'm not just ordering you to pay Ms. Donovan what you owe, I'm also fining you for contempt of court, and I'm recommending that this matter be referred to the district attorney for further investigation." Romano's eyes widened. "What? You can't—" "I can," Judy said, her voice cutting through his protest. "And I will. You came into my courtroom and made a mockery of the law. You threatened a witness. You threatened me. Those actions have consequences, Mr. Romano. Real consequences." Claire's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of fear. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of finally being heard. Romano sat frozen, his face pale. The expensive suit, the polished shoes, the cold confidence, all of it seemed to crumble under the weight of Judy's words. Judy closed the file and set it aside. "Ms. Donovan, you will receive full payment of the $15,000 owed to you. Additionally, Mr. Romano will pay punitive damages in the amount of $5,000 for the emotional distress his actions have caused. The total judgment is $20,000. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Thank you, Your Honor, thank you." Judy nodded, her expression softening just a fraction. "You're welcome. And let this be a lesson to everyone in this room. Justice is not for sale. It cannot be intimidated. It cannot be threatened, and it will always, always prevail." She turned her gaze back to Romano, who looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Mr. Romano, you have 30 days to pay the full judgment. If you fail to do so, a warrant will be issued for your arrest. Do you understand?" Romano nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor." Judy picked up her gavel, holding it for a moment, before bringing it down with a sharp final crack. "This court is adjourned." The sound echoed through the courtroom, a punctuation mark on a moment that would linger long after everyone left. Romano stood slowly, his movements stiff, as if his body had forgotten how to work properly. He did not look at Claire. He did not look at the gallery. He simply turned and walked toward the exit, his footsteps no longer confident, no longer commanding, just heavy. Claire remained seated, her hands pressed to her face, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs, the kind of sobs that come when a weight you have been carrying for months finally lifts. Judge Judy watched her for a moment, then spoke quietly. "Ms. Donovan." Claire looked up, wiping her eyes. "You did the right thing by coming here," Judy said. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Claire nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Your Honor. I didn't think anyone would believe me." Judy's expression softened in a way few people ever saw. "I believe you, and the law believes you. Remember that." Claire stood, gathering her papers with trembling hands. As she walked toward the exit, she passed the spot where Romano had stood moments before. She paused, just for a second, as if feeling the ghost of his presence. Then she lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and walked out with her head high. The courtroom emptied slowly, the gallery filing out in hushed whispers, everyone processing what they had just witnessed. The bailiff remained near the bench, waiting for Judy to gather her things. Judy sat for a moment longer, staring at the empty defendant's table. She had seen men like Romano before, men who believed power was something you took, not something you earned, men who confused fear with respect. But she had also seen what happened when those men met something they could not intimidate, could not threaten, could not buy. They crumbled. And in that crumbling, justice found its way through. Judy stood, gathering her files, and walked toward her chambers. As she passed the bailiff, he nodded respectfully. "That was something, Your Honor." Judy glanced back at him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "It always is." And with that, she disappeared through the door, leaving behind a courtroom that would remember this day for a long time. Because on this day, arrogance met its match, and power learned what it felt like to kneel. The courthouse hallway buzzed with energy, the kind that follows a moment people know they will talk about for weeks. Spectators clustered in small groups, voices low but urgent, replaying what they had just witnessed. A few pulled out their phones, texting friends, posting vague hints about what had happened inside. The story was already spreading, rippling outward like a stone thrown into still water. Claire stood near the exit, her back against the cool marble wall, trying to catch her breath. Her hands still trembled slightly, adrenaline refusing to let go even though the worst was over. A woman approached her, older, gray-haired, with kind eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty. "You were brave in there," the woman said softly. Claire looked up, surprised. "I didn't feel brave." The woman smiled. "Brave people rarely do." Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. The woman squeezed her shoulder gently and walked away, leaving Claire alone with her thoughts. Inside, she felt like she was still waiting for something to collapse. For Romano to come back, for someone to tell her it was all a mistake, that the judgment would be overturned, that power would win the way it always seemed to. But the hallway remained calm. The door to the courtroom stayed closed, and slowly the reality began to settle. She had won. She had actually won. Meanwhile, several floors below, in a dim parking garage that smelled of oil and exhaust, Romano sat in the driver's seat of a black Mercedes, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, he snatched it from the cup holder, glaring at the screen. 3 missed calls. 7 unread messages. All from the same person. He swiped the screen and pressed the phone to his ear. "What?" The voice on the other end was sharp, impatient. "Where are you?" "Leaving," Romano said, his voice flat. "Leaving? What happened? Did you handle it?" Romano's jaw clenched. "It's handled," A pause. Then, more carefully. What does that mean? Romano closed his eyes, exhaling through his nose. It means I lost. Silence. The kind of silence that felt like judgment. You lost. The voice rose, disbelief bleeding into anger. How the hell did you lose? It was a small-time contractor. You were supposed to scare her off, settle for pennies and walk away. I tried, Romano said, his voice tight. The judge wasn't having it. So you push harder. You make it clear. I did make it clear, Romano interrupted, his voice rising. I made it very clear, and she buried me for it. Another pause. Longer this time. What did you do? The voice was quieter now, cautious. Romano's throat felt tight. He did not want to say it out loud. Saying it made it real. I may have implied that problems could disappear? The silence that followed was deafening. You threatened a judge. The voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might summon disaster. Romano did not answer. You threatened Judge Judy? Still no answer. The voice exploded. Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea what you've done? She's not some local nobody you can intimidate. I know who she is, Romano snapped. I didn't think she'd what? Do her job. Enforce the law. You walked into her courtroom and acted like you owned the place. What did you think was going to happen? Romano's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. I thought she'd understand how things work. How things work? The voice was cold now, distant. Things don't work that way anymore, Romano. Not in a courtroom. Not with her. You just painted a target on your back. Romano's stomach twisted. She can't do anything. It's just a civil case. Small claims. She referred you to the district attorney, the voice said, each word sharp and deliberate. That means they're going to look at everything. Every contract, every payment, every person you've ever leaned on. And if they find anything, and they will, you're done. Romano's breath came faster. She was bluffing. Judge Judy doesn't bluff. The voice paused. You need to fix this, now. How? Romano's voice cracked, the first real fear bleeding through. I don't know, but you'd better figure it out, because if this goes where I think it's going, I can't protect you. The line went dead. Romano sat in the silence, the phone still pressed to his ear, staring at nothing. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Helplessness. The kind of helplessness that comes when you realize the walls you built around yourself were made of paper. Back in the courthouse, Judge Judy sat in her chambers, the door closed, the room quiet. She had removed her robe and hung it carefully on the hook behind her desk. Now she sat in her chair, hands folded, staring at the file in front of her. Claire Donovan versus Anthony Romano. She had seen cases like this before. Too many times. People with money or influence or just enough arrogance to believe they were untouchable, walking into her courtroom and expecting the world to bend. And every time, she made sure it did not. But this one felt different. Romano had not just been arrogant, he had been dangerous. The threat he made was not hypothetical. Men like him did not speak in metaphors. When they said people disappeared, they meant it. Judy reached for her phone and dialed a number she did not use often but always kept close. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Judge. Detective Morris, Judy said, her tone even. I'm sending you a file. I need you to look into someone. Who? Anthony Romano. He made threats in my courtroom today. Against a plaintiff. Against me. A pause. What kind of threats? The kind that suggest he's done this before. Morris exhaled, the sound heavy. I'll look into it, but if he's connected the way I think he is, this could get complicated. I don't care if it gets complicated, Judy said. I care that it gets done. Understood. I'll start digging. Good. And Morris? Yeah? Be careful. Men like him don't go down quietly. Neither do I, Judge. Judy ended the call and set the phone down, her gaze returning to the file. She knew what she was starting. knew the kind of attention it would bring, knew the risks. But she had never backed down from a fight in her life. And she was not about to start now. 3 days later, Claire sat in her small office, a cramped room above her workshop that smelled of sawdust and paint. She was reviewing invoices when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Ms. Donovan?" A man's voice, formal, careful. "Yes. This is Detective Raymond Morris. I'm calling regarding your case against Anthony Romano." Claire's heart jumped. "Is something wrong?" "No, ma'am. Actually, I'm calling because Judge Shaindlin referred your case to my office. We're opening an investigation into Mr. Romano's business practices." Claire's breath caught. "An investigation?" "Yes, ma'am. Based on the threats made in court and some preliminary findings, we believe there may be a pattern of intimidation and fraud. We'd like to ask you a few questions, if you're willing." Claire's hands trembled. Yes, of course." "Good. Can you come to the precinct tomorrow? We'll need a formal statement." "I'll be there." "Thank you, Ms. Donovan. And just so you know, you did the right thing. A lot of people wouldn't have had the courage to stand up to someone like Romano." Claire swallowed hard. "I almost didn't. But you did. That matters." After the call ended, Claire sat in the quiet of her office, staring at her phone. The fear she had carried for months, fear of Romano, fear of what he might do, was still there. But it felt smaller now, less suffocating, because for the first time she was not facing him alone. Romano stood in his downtown office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the skyline glittering in the afternoon sun. He had built this view, built this empire, and now it felt like it was crumbling beneath his feet. His lawyer sat across from him, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a permanent frown. "They're serious about this, Tony. The DA's office doesn't open investigations lightly." Romano paced, his hands clenched into fists. "It's one contractor, one case. How does it turn into this?" "Because you made it turn into this," the lawyer said bluntly. "You threatened a judge, in open court, on record. What did you think would happen?" Romano spun toward him. "I didn't think she'd actually—" "She did. And now you're under investigation, which means they're going to look at everything, every deal, every payment, every person you've ever had a dispute with." Romano's chest tightened. "What do I do?" The lawyer leaned back in his chair, studying him. "You cooperate. You settle every outstanding claim quietly. You do not, under any circumstances, make this worse." "And if I don't?" The lawyer's expression hardened. "Then you go to prison." Romano's breath caught. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. "Prison?" "Yes. Fraud. Intimidation. Possibly racketeering if they dig deep enough. You've spent years building walls around yourself, Tony, but walls don't hold when the foundation cracks. And you just cracked yours." Romano sank into his chair, the fight draining out of him. "This is insane. All of this because of one woman?" The lawyer shook his head. "No. All of this because you thought you were above the law. And Judge Judy made sure you learned otherwise." A week later, Claire received a call from the DA's office. The investigation was expanding. 3 other contractors had come forward, all with similar stories. Romano had refused payment, made threats, used his influence to bury complaints. The walls were closing in, and for the first time in his life, Anthony Romano understood what it felt like to be powerless. The district attorney's office was nothing like Romano had imagined. He had spent years building an image of power, control, environments that bent to his will. But this place, sterile white walls, fluorescent lights humming overhead, chairs that creaked when you shifted, this place did not care who he was. He sat across from 2 investigators, a man and a woman, both wearing expressions that gave nothing away. The man, Detective Morris, had graying hair and the kind of tired eyes that came from seeing too much. The woman, Assistant District Attorney Helen Garrett, was younger, sharper, with a pen poised over a legal pad like a weapon waiting to strike. Romano's lawyer sat beside him, silent but tense, his earlier warnings still echoing in Romano's mind. "Mr. Romano," Garrett began, her voice calm but edged with authority, "thank you for coming in voluntarily." Romano nodded stiffly. "I want to cooperate." "Good," she said. "Then let's start with Claire Donovan. You contracted her to renovate a commercial property. She completed the work. You refused to pay. Why?" Romano shifted in his seat. "It was a business decision." Morris leaned forward. "A business decision? Or intimidation?" Romano's jaw tightened. "I don't intimidate people." Garrett glanced at her notes. "In Judge Sheindlin's courtroom, you stated, and I quote, 'One call and people disappear.' How would you characterize that statement?" Romano's lawyer touched his arm, a silent warning. Romano swallowed hard. "It was poor judgment. I was frustrated." "Frustrated," Garrett repeated, her tone flat. "Mr. Romano, we've spoken to 3 other contractors who worked for you. All 3 reported similar experiences. Completed work, approved invoices, refused payment, and when they pushed back, they received threats." Romano's face flushed. "That's not true." Morris slid a folder across the table. "These are sworn statements, dates, details. One contractor said you told him his business would burn to the ground if he pursued legal action. Another said you had connections that could make her regret ever meeting you." Romano stared at the folder, his hands trembling slightly. "They're lying." Garrett's eyes hardened. "All of them? Including Ms. Donovan, whose testimony was corroborated by a recording you made yourself?" Silence. Romano's lawyer cleared his throat. "My client is willing to settle all outstanding claims, full payment plus compensation for damages." Garrett leaned back. "That's a start. But this isn't just about money anymore. Your behavior suggests a pattern of criminal conduct, extortion, intimidation, fraud." Romano's breath quickened. "I'm not a criminal." Morris's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Then help us understand. Why did you refuse to pay these people? Why threaten them?" Romano's hands clenched into fists on the table. For a long moment he said nothing. The room pressed in around him, the weight of silence heavier than any accusation. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because I could." The words hung in the air, stark and damning. Garrett's pen stilled. Morris's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes, recognition, maybe, or disappointment. "Because you could," Garrett repeated slowly. Romano looked down, unable to meet their eyes. "I built my business from nothing. I clawed my way up. And somewhere along the way, I learned that people respect power. They respect fear. If you let them push back, they take advantage. So I stopped letting them push." "By threatening them," Morris said. Romano nodded, the movement small, almost defeated. "Yes." Garrett closed her folder. "Mr. Romano, that's not power, that's abuse. And it ends now." Romano's lawyer leaned forward. "What are you proposing?" Garrett glanced at Morris, then back to Romano. "Full restitution to all affected parties, a formal apology, and a consent decree prohibiting Mr. Romano from engaging in similar conduct in the future. If he violates the decree, he faces criminal charges." Romano's lawyer nodded slowly. "We can agree to that." Garrett's gaze remained fixed on Romano. "And one more thing. You will appear before Judge Sheindlin again." Romano's head snapped up. "What? Why?" "Because she referred this case to us, because your conduct occurred in her courtroom, and because she deserves to see how this ends." Romano's face went pale. I can't face her again." Morris's voice was quiet but firm. "You don't have a choice." 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Word had spread that Romano was returning, and people came to see what would happen next. The gallery buzzed with anticipation, cameras positioned to catch every moment. Claire sat in the front row, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm but watchful. Beside her sat 2 of the other contractors who had come forward, a middle-aged man named David and a younger woman named Sophie. All three had suffered at Romano's hands, and all three were here to see justice completed. The door opened, and Romano entered. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The expensive suit was still there, but it hung differently now, as if the man inside had shrunk. His shoulders were hunched, his gaze fixed on the floor. He walked to the defendant's table and sat down, his lawyer beside him. The confidence that had carried him into this room weeks ago was gone, replaced by something raw and fragile. Judge Judy entered, and the room rose as one. She took her seat, her expression unreadable, and gestured for everyone to sit. "Mr. Romano," she began, her voice steady. "You're back." Romano nodded, his throat working. "Yes, Your Honor." Judy leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "I've been briefed on the investigation. I understand you've agreed to settle all outstanding claims and accept a consent decree." "Yes, Your Honor." Judy paused, studying him. "Do you understand what that means?" Romano swallowed. "It means if I do this again, I go to jail." "Correct," Judy said, "but that's not all it means. It means you're admitting that what you did was wrong, that you abused your power, that you hurt people who trusted you." Romano's hands trembled in his lap. "I understand." Judy's gaze shifted to Claire, then to David and Sophie. "Ms. Donovan, Mr. Hayes, Ms. Chen, do you accept the terms of this settlement?" Claire stood, her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor." David and Sophie stood as well, nodding. Judy turned back to Romano. "Then there's one more thing I require." Romano looked up, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Your Honor?" Judy's expression softened, but her voice remained firm. "I want you to apologize, not to me, to them." Romano's breath caught. He glanced at his lawyer, who nodded slightly. Slowly, Romano stood. He turned to face Claire, David, and Sophie, his hands shaking. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I'm sorry." The words came out broken, unsteady, but they were real. "I'm sorry for what I did, for refusing to pay you, for threatening you, for making you feel afraid." His eyes filled with tears. "I convinced myself that power meant control, that respect meant fear, but I was wrong, and I hurt you because of it." Claire's eyes glistened, but she did not look away. Romano's voice dropped to a whisper. "I can't undo what I did, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be better." Silence filled the courtroom, not the heavy, suffocating kind, the kind that allows truth to breathe. Judy nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Romano." Romano sank back into his chair, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Judy picked up her gavel, holding it for a moment before speaking. "This case has been about more than money. It's been about accountability, about the abuse of power, about the courage it takes to stand up to someone who believes they're untouchable." She looked at Claire, her expression warm. "Ms. Donovan, you did something extraordinary. You refused to be silenced. You fought for what was right, even when it was terrifying, and because of you, others found the courage to do the same." Claire wiped her eyes, nodding. Judy turned back to Romano. "Mr. Romano, you came into this courtroom believing you were above the law. You learned otherwise. I hope this experience teaches you something more important, that true power comes not from control, but from integrity, not from fear, but from respect." She raised the gavel. "This matter is resolved. The settlement is approved. Mr. Romano will pay full restitution to all parties within 30 days. The consent decree is entered into the record." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "This court is adjourned." As the courtroom emptied, Claire stood near the exit, watching Romano walk toward the door. He moved slowly, heavily, a man carrying the weight of his own reckoning. Just before he reached the exit, he paused. He turned back, his eyes finding hers across the room. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. No words, no gestures, Just two people who had been locked in a battle neither had wanted but both had needed. Then Romano nodded, once, slowly, and walked out. Claire exhaled, feeling something inside her finally let go. The fear, the anger, the doubt, all of it releasing like breath she had been holding for too long. David approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You did it." Claire smiled, tears streaming down her face. "We did it." Sophie joined them, and the three stood together, bound by shared pain and shared victory. Outside, Romano stood on the courthouse steps, the afternoon sun harsh against his face. His lawyer was already walking to his car, leaving Romano alone with his thoughts. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out, staring at the screen. A text from an old associate. "Heard what happened. You okay?" Romano typed a response, then deleted it. He typed another, then deleted that too. Finally, he pocketed the phone and started walking. He did not know where he was going, only that he could not stay where he was, because for the first time in his life, Anthony Romano understood what it felt like to lose, and in that loss, he found something he had not felt in years. Shame. But also, buried deep, almost imperceptible, a tiny flicker of something else. The faintest possibility of redemption. Back in her chambers, Judge Judy sat alone, the day's events settling around her like dust after a storm. She had delivered justice countless times, seen countless people broken by their own arrogance. But this case felt different. Not because Romano's fall was dramatic, but because his victims had risen. Claire, David, Sophie. Three people who had every reason to stay silent, to accept the injustice, to move on. But they had not. They had stood up. They had spoken out. They had demanded better. And in doing so, they had changed not just their own lives, but the life of a man who had spent years believing he was untouchable. Judy reached for her phone and sent a brief text to Detective Morris. "Thank you for your work on this case." His response came quickly. "Thank you for referring it. Justice isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." Judy smiled faintly and set the phone down. Justice. The word felt heavy, sacred, hard-earned, but it also felt right. She stood, gathering her things and prepared to leave. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new battles, new people seeking what they deserved. And she would be there, as she always was, making sure they got it. Because in a world that often rewarded power over principle, someone had to stand for what was right. Someone had to remind people that threats could not silence truth, that arrogance could not outlast accountability, and that no matter how powerful you believed yourself to be, the law, real, unyielding, fair, was always more powerful. Judge Judy turned off the light and closed the door behind her. The courtroom fell silent, but the echoes of justice remained.